manhunt for a heavily armed extremist. Authorities are now combing a national park. The suspect made threats against a scientist who is leading the country's response to COVID-19.
Belgium has a big problem on its hands, and I'm not talking about the coronavirus, which, by many accounts, it appears to have handled quite badly. I'm referring to the manhunt, which has gripped the nation over the past few weeks. The fugitive is Jurgen Conings, a heavily armed 46-year-old army sniper who is described as far-right and believes the government is using the pandemic as a pretext to control and harm its citizens. In particular, he singles out Belgium's leading virologist, the controversial and sometimes provocative Marc Van Ranst, who is now under round-the-clock protection. While it's easy to dismiss Conings as a lone wolf conspiracy theorist, in actual fact, tens of thousands of Belgians have expressed their support for him online. We'll get into all of this in a moment with our guests, but first, let's take a brief look at the manhunt.
There's an interesting situation playing out in Belgium right now. There's currently a soldier in the Belgium army who's on the run.
The manhunt dominates newspaper headlines, with one tabloid labeling him as the Belgian Rambo.
Still no sign of Jurgen Conings. More than 400 troops in Belgium are mobilized in the search for the 46-year-old.
Investigators say the soldier stole arms from a military base and then disappeared.
L'homme est potentiellement dangereux, armé et très bien entraîné.
The army shooting instructor has been on an anti-terror watch list since February for his extreme right-wing views, but was still able to access weapons.
Anti-tank rocket launchers and ammunition were found in Conings' abandoned car in West Belgium.
Dans toute cette affaire, nous avons commis des erreurs. C'est indiscutable.
He wrote a note before he left. He said in the note that I no longer wish to live in a world ruled by virologists and politicians.
He made threats against a scientist who is leading the country's response to COVID-19.
Marc Van Ranst has been repeatedly targeted by coronavirus skeptics and the far right. He and his family are understood to be in a safe house.
You have to fight the anti-vaxxers.
They think he's going to go after this virologist.
Police have warned the public not to approach him.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And Kathleen de Porter is a Belgian MP in an area of the country where police and the army have searched for Conings at one point. Pieter Kleppe is the editor-in-chief of an online publication called The Brussels Report. And finally, we're joined by Craig Harrison, a former sniper in the British Army. Thank you, all of you, for coming on the programme. Much appreciated. Peter, I'd like to start with you. Hundreds of people looking for him for the past couple of weeks now. Why has he not been caught yet? And what kind of an embarrassment is this for both the Belgian government and the army?
Well, I think both questions are not so obvious to answer. First of all, why has he not been caught yet? I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, he may be hiding with a friend. He may have killed himself and made sure that it was hard to find his body because he emptied his bank accounts before he disappeared. So that's definitely a possibility. I mean, in terms of blaming the Belgian army, as far as I have understood, if there is somebody to blame, it's the Secret Service of the army that have not properly taken action against him. He was on a list of, you could say, potential terrorists, and nevertheless they allowed him to have access to heavy weaponry.
Yeah, that was a stunning aspect of this story, that he could be put on a watch list, that he could be sanctioned twice for allegedly threatening Marc Van Ranst, your leading virologist there. He's degraded, and in giving him that new position, he has access to the armory.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, actually, and it's also surprising that the Belgian Minister of Defense did not feel the need to step down. I mean, I think it's sort of a recent development, not just in Belgium, but all across mainland Europe, and this is definitely different in the United Kingdom, that politicians no longer take responsibility. Of course, they are, I mean, she would not be personally to blame, but at the end of the day, she's responsible for that specific government department.
Can we look at what's motivating this man? Because we understand he has troubled personal circumstances, and what we're trying to work out is, to what extent is he motivated by his personal circumstances falling apart and by a genuine belief that government and scientists are using the pandemic as a pretext to control and harm its citizens?
Well, it's clearly the case that he has very right-wing views. Apart from that, some people have speculated that also the fact that he has been active in war zones may have contributed to personal issues. Again, that's speculation. I think more interesting is actually the reaction of the public. We could see that 50,000 people, at least 50,000 people, expressed support for him on Facebook by joining a Facebook group backing him. And I think that tells you not that all these people are far right, absolutely not, but that there's a lot of discontent in society, no doubt because of the lockdown, and that there's a lot of hatred, really, unfortunately, against these virologists, people that are ultimately only scientists. And to explain that, I think one explanation is that the government in Belgium has sort of sent out the scientists to bring the bad news, to explain the lockdowns, instead of taking responsibility themselves.
Right. That's a very interesting point, Kathleen. As a politician, perhaps you recognize that. You know, Peter said there were 50,000 people supporting Jurgen Conings online. They can't all be extremists. They clearly have a resentment towards the government and the scientists. What went wrong in the way that the government and the other institutions managed this crisis in Belgium?
Well, I think two things really went wrong. This was the communication and the democratic debate. So in the beginning of the crisis, we didn't have a full government. Afterwards, we did have, but that didn't change a lot. Communication was problematic. And as Peter says, virologists, with this word, virologists were sent out to bring the message. And of course, it wasn't a pleasant message, because if you have to bring out a lockdown, people are in their home, they can't do anything. So they had to bring the bad message, and politicians didn't take their responsibility. Just as right now the Minister of Defense doesn't take the responsibility either. But then we also had the problem of the democratic check. This means that, for example, in our parliament, there were very few debates on the essence of why there was a lockdown, how long we would take it, how we would manage the evening clock, for example. In Holland, there was a real debate in parliament about this. There were technical sessions, and this didn't happen. This didn't happen in Belgium, and I think this really frustrated the people. So they didn't feel recognized, and we didn't have the support base for all the measures, and then things like this can happen.
And of course, they put in the spotlight the virologists and the scientists, and they expect them to handle it, and not all of them are, you know, very, shall we say, sensitive to the population's concerns. So in particular, Marc Van Ranst, I understand he has a large presence on social media, and that he doesn't suffer fools gladly. He's very direct, perhaps dismissive, Peter.
Well, yeah, people have made that case. Actually, Pedro Facon, one of the top officials dealing with the pandemic, has said that it's perhaps not so wise that this particular virologist that has been threatened by Mr. Conings, that it was not so wise of him to always give his opinion on all kinds of things that had nothing to do with his area of expertise. I mean, that's by no means justifying threats against him. This is, of course, scandalous. But it definitely contributed to the opposition against this particular virologist amongst certain people, and then if you have this dangerous far right soldier on the loose, it's sort of I think. It's the backstory to it, but I think it goes a lot beyond the person of Marc Van Ranst here.
Kathleen, Politico is running the headline, Belgium's most wanted man ignites a culture war. Flemish nationalists portray a renegade soldier on the run as a symbol of deeper political anxieties. What kind of political anxieties are they referring to? And is Belgium moving more towards the right?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that not everyone who's supporting Jurgen Conings is a Flemish nationalist, and there are also differences between that. But I think they're pointing the fact that the lack of this democratic support is coming out. People are right now, because of what happened with Jurgen Conings, are joining a kind of movement, and we have this polarization. Which is going on in Europe, which we should be very careful with. And the corona crisis didn't help on it, because people are locked down in their house. They only have the social media. And I think it's one of the reasons that people like Jurgen Conings might have so much influence. We have this frustration, which is going on, and now it's shown that people are frustrated, and as politicians, we should listen to them.
Craig Harrison, I want to move on to the hunt for this man and what kind of skill set he has. You're one of the most accomplished marksmen in Britain. Tell us, what kind of skills would he have acquired in his elite career, and how is it, you think, that he hasn't been tracked down yet?
Basically, a sniper is there to not to be seen, and if he doesn't want to be found, he's not going to be found with his skill set as a weapons instructor and a frontline sniper. But the idea of a sniper is to keep moving. If he thinks he's getting chased, he'll keep moving and keep moving until. But
of course, he's being tracked by people also with very high levels of skills. I mean, the best that the Belgian government and army and so on can put forward. So you're not convinced that he's still in the area even? You think he has help, right?
Yes, I do. You think that's 41-mile radius of national park, at the top of my head. That's 600 people looking for him. They'll break that down into a grid and inspect every grid. I do believe on Thursday they found his some sort of structure which was abandoned. But he will keep moving. He will keep moving and moving and moving.
And what would be your guess now? Where do you think he might be?
Top of my head, in the Netherlands.
Right. And just one last question to get into the psychology of this gentleman. I mean, we don't know him. We know he's 46. He's got very difficult personal circumstances. He believes that the Belgian government is using the coronavirus pandemic for nefarious purposes. Is it possible that in his various tours he would now be suffering from some sort of PTSD, or do you think he's thinking clearly and there's some overall kind of scheme to what he's trying to do here?
I think if he has PTSD, it would take over, and it wouldn't be as strong because he's still getting hunted. He's still got that the rush of getting hunted, and so to find him will be, I don't know. I wish you luck.
Yeah. Well, Craig Harrison, Kathleen de Porter, and Pieter Kleppe, thank you all for your contributions. Much appreciated. Of course, this soldier is not alone in believing the pandemic is being used by governments as a pretext to control or interfere in people's lives unnecessarily. Such beliefs are held by many others all over the world. A global YouGov survey from October found that more than 1 in 3 Americans think the Chinese government deliberately created and spread the virus. More than half of Nigerians believe the same. 1 in 5 people in the UK believe the death toll has been exaggerated. And around half of South Africans and Turks think the truth about the harmful effects of vaccines is being hidden from the public. Again, this is from October, when the last global survey was taken. And it's not just laymen who distrust how governments are handling the pandemic. This is a former vice president of Pfizer imploring people to take back control of their countries before it's too late.
You don't need masks, they don't work. Forget lockdowns, they never slowed transmission, which took place mostly in institutions like hospitals and care homes. You don't need to be vaccinated by inadequately tested and somewhat dangerous gene-based spike protein-inducing proteins, and you don't need to do what you're told by corrupt scientists who are apparently advising our government. If you don't do that in the next few weeks, it will be over. I believe if we get to a point of a so-called vaccine passport, I think you will have lost the chance to take it back and you will regret it.
Well, with apparently authoritative people like that on TikTok and elsewhere, it's no wonder some people are confused about what to believe. For example, should children be given the vaccine? Our guest, Dr. Tony Hinton, doesn't think it's necessary. He was a consultant surgeon with the NHS for 30 years, and although he believes in vaccines in general, he's totally against giving children the coronavirus vaccine, and we'll find out why in a moment. We're also joined by Dr. Julian Tang, a clinical virologist at Leicester Infirmary, who takes pretty much the opposite view. Welcome, both of you, to The Nexus. Dr. Hinton, perhaps I could start with you. Why are you against children being given the coronavirus vaccine?
Well, let me just make clear, first of all, my own vaccine history. I've had every vaccine I have. I've had more than most people as a surgeon, things like hepatitis B, because people don't need that. I've had both my doses of Pfizer. My children have had all their childhood vaccines up until including HPV. So I'm not anti-vaccine. I've got two worries about this particular COVID vaccine. The first is children really do not suffer in any bad way from COVID. They suffer the least of any part of our population. So there is very little, if anything, for children to gain. There's no benefit. So any new medical treatment will have a risk, no matter how small that risk is. There's no point in taking that risk if there is no benefit. My second worry is that if there are some deaths from this COVID vaccine in children, not only will it put a stop to this COVID vaccination program, but it could actually set back by years our very, very successful children's vaccination program, which really is one of the best in Europe or the world. And that is for diseases, polio, mumps, rubella, that can have devastating consequences, even death, for children.
But why do you think there are risks for children taking the vaccine?
Well, there are risks. There are always risks. Any medical treatment, a medicine, a vaccine, an operation. When I do an operating list, I have to consent each patient about all the possible risks, and the patient makes an informed choice.
Are you relying on any specific data?
There's two sorts of data for. There's a recent Pfizer trial that is going ahead. That appears to show some negative consequences, shall we say, for children. It's not fully published yet. It's updated every few months. There's only 2,000 children in that yet. And the safety data for that COVID vaccine is continuing for the next 2 years. This vaccine at the moment only has an emergency use license. There are two particular pieces of evidence that we've looked at. One looked at possible pulmonary emboli in children, and it looked as though there were maybe 2 in 1,000 children. That could possibly lead to 100 deaths in the UK. We've also looked at Pfizer lethality in adults, and that looks to work out as about 1 in 61,000. And if that was similar in children, again, 5 million children being vaccinated at senior school, that would work out somewhere about 81 child deaths. But let's face it, none of us want even one child death from this COVID vaccine that children don't need. Even one child death that is unnecessary could not only finish this vaccine program, but adversely affect those other very important vaccine programs that are important for children.
Dr. Tang, every parent will be listening very, very closely to this, because they'll ask themselves, why, if the coronavirus cannot harm my child who does not have underlying health conditions, why should you take even the slightest risk by administering the vaccine to a child?
So I'm not completely opposed to my colleagues' views, but I think our assessment of the risk of COVID is slightly different. We know that about 5 to 10% of children who get COVID, even otherwise healthy children, do develop these long COVID symptoms that may last for some time, at least 12 weeks or more, where they are quite debilitated. They can't walk, they can't get out of bed, they can't think, they can't go back to school very easily. And in adults, this long COVID is probably around 10 to 20%, and that's much more firm in terms of what we know, because there's just been more adults with COVID that we've been following. The risk of the vaccine, I mean, every vaccine does have some risks, and there are some local and systemic reactions to the vaccine from the small Pfizer trial that has been published in the New Journal of Medicine recently. But again, they have to be weighed against the local context of what has been seen with complications from the COVID infection in children. So I think that different populations will have different balances of the benefits and risks for these vaccines. And for example, if you look back at the history of vaccination in children, most of the vaccines have actually worked very well. There have been some notable exceptions, for example, like the 2009 pandemics vaccine that caused narcolepsy in children from Finland and Sweden due to a particular HLA gene that they had, that they shared. And there have also been historically the problems with the rotavirus vaccine back in the 1970s and the RSV vaccines back in the early 60s, 70s, where it showed enhancement of disease rather than protection from disease in those two vaccines, rotavirus with interception and RSV with enhanced complications from vaccine-enhanced antibodies.
Dr. Tang, I'm sorry to cut you short, but it's very important from parents' point of view. They're very anxious right now. They're saying, should my child take the vaccine or not? And you're saying, on balance, they should take it?
So on balance, I think the children will benefit from the vaccine.
Right. And Dr. Hinton, what Dr. Tang was saying is that you can also suffer. It's not just about death; it's also about long COVID. So at least you can protect them from that.
I think the short answer is: would you prefer your child to have long COVID, or would you prefer your child to be dead?
I don't think Dr. Tang is convinced by that. You can have a quick rebuttal.
Well, if we talk about, let's talk about long COVID. There was a recent German study looking at, I think it looked about 1,500 school children, and they assessed the symptoms of all the children over weeks and months. And they were also testing the children to see who was positive for COVID and had it, and who hadn't had COVID. And I think I sent you a slide of this.
Yeah.
And when you looked at the list of symptoms, there was virtually no difference in the symptom scores between the children that had COVID and the children that hadn't had COVID. But Dr. Tang has already said this may be a self-limiting condition that perhaps lasts up to 12 weeks. So for something that gets better with either no treatment or symptomatic treatment, is that worth risking any child that might die from what I would say is an unnecessary vaccine, this particular vaccine?
Dr. Tang, we are running out of time with both of you now. 2 short answers, please, if you would. We've been talking about the manhunt in Belgium and people's distrust of governments and also of scientists. I'm not saying a majority, it is a minority, of course. Do you think that the governments around the world could have done better in explaining the whole situation and winning the trust of their populations? And if so, where could they have done that?
Yes, so I think the government messaging may have been too black and white in some cases. If there's uncertainty, the government needs to make this clear, rather than saying that we can definitely do this, we can definitely do that, or this definitely doesn't happen, this definitely can't happen. I think that has caused some mistrust in the public, especially when those things that they said can't happen have actually happened. And with the vaccine, I think the vaccine messaging has been much better, but of course it can be improved somewhat. But the thing is, the data is quite uncertain, so the messaging can't be more certain than the data, unfortunately.
Well, Dr. Tang and Dr. Hinton, thank you both for your contributions. We could talk much further about this, but unfortunately we have run out of time. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.